It's so subtle you can't hear it. It's pretty subtle. It's consciousness itself, awareness. We talked about love having shape, though we haven't got to it yet. And we talked about how shape affects everything. Well, there is shape associated with awareness. How the lenses that you interpret the reality with have shape to them. There's shape connected to it. It seems kind of like a strange subject. It seems kind of strange, like love would have a shape too, but so does awareness. And since that's what we're really talking about here, is going from one level to another, is changing awareness, changing consciousness levels, we need to kind of look at these things for a moment. According to Thoth, if you were to come up to a planet you've never seen before, and you wanted to know what level of consciousness they had reached on there, he said all you'd have to do is just get a few of them and hold them still and measure them. Don't move. And see the shape of the field that would fit around them relative to a sphere. And whether or not the perimeter of the, for humans, for example, the perimeter of the square that fits around you is bigger or littler than the circle that fits around you, and how much bigger or little will determine exactly, mathematically, how they're interpreting the reality. There's other ways. You could look at the grid around the planet and know instantly anyway, but you could also tell by their physical shape and form. And then there's this other thing he said, that there's a legend that says that there are 9 concentric crystal balls underneath the Sphinx. There's these, if you can imagine this one crystal ball inside of another crystal ball inside of another one, there's 9 of them. And that this is supposedly a physical object sitting somewhere underneath the Sphinx, and that it was the key to consciousness on Earth. And there are people searching for this real hard, have been for many years, trying to find this crystal ball and thinking that that's going to be the key. Because once they get to the ball, then they got to figure out what it is, which might take longer. Thoth says that it's really there, but that it isn't necessary to have the ball. All you got to do is draw 9 concentric circles on a page, and that's good enough. And so here are these 9 concentric circles, starting from this little one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, out to the green one out there. And that, and Thoth says that if you want to understand the consciousness, he says, look at the relationship of the squares to the circles. Again, this is male energy in relationship to female energy. Look at the squares and relationships, and look how squares that are around the circles interact with the circles. And look to see if there are any places where the phi ratio takes place, where the golden mean ratio happens, that, you know, where the circle and the square are the same perimeter, or if it's very close. You're not going to get a perfection starting out, but where it hits really, really closely. Well, you look at the first one, the first square around the first circle, and it doesn't even touch another circle. It doesn't interact with another circle. The square around the second one still doesn't touch. The square around the third one starts to penetrate the fourth one, but that's obviously not there. But the square that goes around the fourth circle relative to the fifth circle happens to be an almost perfect phi ratio. That is the place that self-aware consciousness happens for the first time. That's 42 plus 2 chromosomes. That's the aberrational. It doesn't go into phi ratio again until you get to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, this purple one. Seventh circle relative to, not one above like the fourth and the fifth, but the seventh circle relative to the ninth one. So you see how it passes through the green one here? We're just visually looking at this right now. That is the seventh relative to the ninth, also forms a near perfect phi ratio. So there are two places in there where you have a near perfect one. However, according to Thoth, life has never figured out how to go from the 4th level to the 7th level without passing through this disharmonic level between them. So there's another stage in there. I realize I'm not pinning anything down here yet. I will. So this 4th level here, relative to the 5th, there's 2 stages in between this 4th circle and the 5th circle and the 7th circle. Getting mixed up myself here. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4th square and the 7th square, there are 2 other possible squares that are in between. As it turns out, and I never understood why for a long time, but it was the 5th circle relative to the 6th one that life has chosen. He didn't tell me for a long time. He said, you figure it out. Well, it took me like 2 years or something to figure it out. And I finally did figure out. And what it is that if you take this square and of the 7th and turn it into a diamond, it will so happen that this one will come up and touch perfectly. If you drew these perfectly, this is just touching that circle. You see how this square comes down? And if you do, it comes up and it will touch perfectly, and that particular consciousness shows or can determine where the boundaries of the next one are. And so, in terms of human terms, we have something within us that is the key to Christ consciousness. We are not Christ consciousness, but we contain something within us that can reach it. So it's just geometrically showing what it is. If you want to see what I'm talking about in terms of the ratios, this green one is the 1st level, the red one is the 2nd level, and the blue one is the 3rd level of consciousness. And you can actually measure which one is bigger than the other without any sticks or anything. That's usually should be able to. Using your radii as your measuring stick and counting that measuring stick as 1. Gets more, you could count it as anything, but if you count it as 1.6, it becomes complicated. So you count it as 1. So your radii is your measuring stick. Then you could tell how many radii are across one edge of the square because it is the same as the diameter of this 4th circle. So there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 radii across that 4th circle. Same number of radii across that edge. And so there's, since there's 4 edges, there's going to be 4 times 8, or 32 radii perfectly around that green square. And the 5th circle out here, if you want to know how many radii are around that, you just count across, and you'll see that there are 10 radii across the 5th circle, and you just go 10 times pi. And 10 times pi is 31.40. So there's 31.40 radii around that circle. So they're very close. One is 31.4, and the other one is 32. They're very, very close in that. And then they go way out until you get to the 7th one. And the 7th one has 14 radii across it, and 4 times 14 is 56. There's 56 radii around the blue square. And if you come out to the final circle, there's 18 radii across it, and 18 times pi is 56.52. So the first one has the circle a little bit smaller. The second one has the circle a little bit bigger. And if you keep running these circles out for a long ways, you'll see this little bigger, little smaller, little bigger, little smaller, little bigger, and how over time we keep getting closer and closer to this perfection of this perfect square and perfect circle as consciousness progresses. The one that we are in is this red one, which is the stepping stone between the two, and we're not even close. But it'll show that if you measure them, I think we're about 3 radii off or something. Our consciousness isn't even, we're not even close to being harmonic. But a necessary place to go. What is it about this, why does this happen at the 4th circle relative to the 5th? There is an actual reason why consciousness becomes self-aware at that stage. There's a hidden pattern behind this. And the hidden pattern is very familiar. It's the fruit of life. If you take the fruit of life and you count this as your radii as 1, you make a circle which is there, and you come out one more and put a circle which will come around there, and then one more, and you keep, in other words, you make your concentric circles out from that, starting with the radii of this. Here's what happens. This becomes the 1, 2, 3, the 4th circle. There's your square. And the 5th circle is the one that exactly contains. Look how the fruit of life fits into that pattern like a key. Perfectly. Absolutely, flawlessly. And that is the reason that self-aware happens at that point. It's the reason behind it. It's the secret. This is in all your sacred geometry. When you get to something and you want to know why, look further. Look further. See what the sacred forms are that are hidden behind that, and then you'll begin to understand why. And so this is the first time right here. Okay, I get to talk about Lucy Lubitz. She's a great woman. Though she's dead now, I'm really sorry. I really wanted to meet her, but she died a few years ago. She lived in Abydos, Egypt. But when I was studying all this, I started studying the Egyptian thoughts on it. I'm getting this from Thoth. He tells me things, and whenever he tells me things, I start checking him out always. He told me to. He says, don't believe me. Go find out for yourself. It's the same thing I tell you. And so I started checking. He said that there were these 5 levels, and that we were within 3. And so I started checking this in Egyptian beliefs and thoughts, and found out that they did believe that there were 5 levels, and that we were functioning through 3. And Lucy Lubitz happened to be one of the people who was Swallow Lubitz's daughter, one of the people who had really studied this in depth, this whole concept of these 3 different levels of consciousness that we were involved in. And she took everything she knew and put it into this one drawing. It was the summation of everything she knew about this. And so I had to redraw the drawing because it wasn't real clear. I redrew the drawing down here like this and got all the lines clear and straight. And the first thing that appears that you can see is you've got a Star of David with a Star of David in it and a circle in the center. Well, that's the minimum amount of information to give the fruit of life. So, I mean, immediately you see that. And here you see this ladder running up the middle, which goes from 0 to 19, and then it goes to 20 and 21 up here. And she talks about how there are 3 different sizes of skulls associated with 3 different levels. And this is talking about these 3 different skull sizes. She says the first one is at 18. And according to the Egyptian belief, we grew this entire top of our head when writing was introduced to deal with the complexity of writing. That this was added on later. And then later, when we go to the next level, we will grow a much bigger skull, like Akhenaten type skull, to deal with the complexity of 4th dimensional consciousness. This is that, remember I said there was a big pile of rocks, it was at Karnak? That was a big pile of rocks, and she just picked up one of them, maybe 2 or 3 of them, measured them, looked at it, and said, aha. And said, made a drawing, says, that's what it looks like. And told them how, and they put all the rocks together and then formed it. Then she went over to another big pile of rocks. I don't have the other one here. Picked up some of those and measured those and said, okay, this is what it looked like. And they put it all together and it formed this other temple, which was different than this one. And she could tell just on the geometry. I mean, this is how well she understood what sacred geometry was all about. Because these temples were all holographic in their nature, so she knew that once she knew what a little piece was, she could figure out what everything was going to be like. And she was an amazing, amazing person. And this is the Luxor temple, an aerial view, a drawing of it from the Luxor. And this temple is based on 19. Remember that ladder went up, and at 19 it showed our skull size? And this was the temple of man, which is us. And you see the skeleton behind here. You enter in down feet. This is a big, huge, enormous, incredible 3 or 4 block long temple. It's big. And inside of here are all the proportions of the human body and all these other kinds of things, carefully worked out. It's very, very carefully. And it's broken up into these 19 divisions. Well, I've never been able to correlate the straight Egyptian 18, 19, and 21 divisions that they have given the 3 levels of consciousness with, and the one that Thoth has given me, which is this one of these other views. I can't, at this point, cannot find the bridge between the two. There's going to be some sacred geometry form hidden behind there that's there, but I can't find it, that would bridge those two things. So far, I can't do that. So I have to skip between one or other, whether I'm talking about Egyptian system or the one that Thoth has given me. And this is the one where I told that story, which I'm not going to tell this time, about going into the Temple of Dreams. I remember, for those of you that saw the thing. I know I haven't told any stories yet, because I'm just barely being able to get the information through here. I will tell a couple here, but it's. I don't know. I'm gonna have to go to 6 days. Yeah.
Why not?
That's why he did it in 6 days. You need it. I can barely rest doing it in 5. I'll tell you, it's really hard. It's really hard. For a long time, I was doing it in 4, and I mean, we were just like, I had to drop out tons of stuff and really move out to be able to make it. Well, anyway, this temple has a long causeway that goes for several miles over to, this is Luxor, and it goes over to Karnak. There's this wide thing about as wide as this room, lined with sphinxes, with sphinx heads on it. And then the sphinx heads turn into ram's heads as it gets into the Temple of Dreams. And so the Temple of Man are connected to the Temple of Dreams, and they have you come in here for, this is where your initiation begins. This is where Thoth had me. Again, I had to start in that temple. He said if I started in any other temple, forget it and go home. And I had to start here for the first initiation here, and then go to the Temple of Dreams, and then from there were certain places I had to go to all of it. So when we talk about that. And the Temple of Dreams is very powerful if you ever have that initiation, because your dreams become real, and it becomes a school. And for a long time, I was taught through my dreams. I mean, there was no rest, right? I'd go in, I'd lay down, and here I'd be with all these people teaching me all this stuff, and it was kind of fun, but it was a lot of work. Kind of glad it's over with, actually. So coming back to this, here's this fruit of life pattern that's around here. This skull that's up here, that the Egyptians claim that we grew in response to this, to writing. There is physiological evidence to suggest strongly that what they are saying is true. And that is the fact that you can take the entire top half of your head and cut it off and throw it away, and it doesn't kill you. It's called a lobotomy. And this is the electromagnetic, this is the scheme of the basic scheme of the human brain into electronics. And it says right down here that removal of the upper cortical areas, which where conscious thinking takes place, has little effect on the circuit of information required for the equally complex computations needed for walking and maintaining equilibrium. I mean, obviously, if you cut off the top half of your head, you're not going to be the same. And you can't run computers and things like that. But you don't die. I mean, which is really remarkable, that it doesn't kill you, that you can take something so seemingly important and get rid of it. And, but according to them, that's because it was an addition to. It was not part of the essential mechanism. Now, coming back to this again, first of all, there was this fruit of life pattern and this stair-step pattern. Here was the fruit of life pattern that she has around there. And so I redrew that pattern as a separate drawing. I was going to begin to analyze what she was doing. So I drew one of the patterns of her. And then I took the ladder pattern and I drew it. And the ladder pattern, which around there, is another way of drawing concentric circles. So I drew this pattern. And then I thought that I would just be able to take these two patterns and superimpose them. That was just sort of the way I was going to, it was just my way of proceeding to try to figure out all the ways that she was looking at this. And when I tried to join the two together, they didn't fit. And I went back and I thought, oh, I must have made a mistake. And I looked at things together and put them back together, and they wouldn't fit. They just wouldn't go together. And you see, because the central pattern in her drawing shows clearly that the central circle is divided into 5 equal places, not counting this line down the middle. There's a very clear 5 division and 7 above and 7 below. So if I took the fruit of life pattern shows that there's a central, from the central pattern, there's 2 circles above it, reaching up to here. And if this is 5, then this would have to be 5, and this would have to be 5. But when you integrate those 2 patterns together, you'll find that there's a half a circle above and a half a circle below, and it won't work. It just won't work. And I couldn't believe it, and I went back to her original drawing, and then I assumed the ladder was equal, because that's what you do. You assume there's an equal ladder, right? But when I carefully analyzed or measured very, very carefully, I found that the 5 spaces in the middle were one size, and the 7 above and 7 below, she had contracted them slightly to take up that half space so that the whole thing would fit together. And that was her, like Leonardo had the writing that you had to put a mirror onto, which would show the reflection, that there was that the female was a mirror image. This was her way of saying that our consciousness isn't harmonic. It isn't harmonic. She knew that it wouldn't fit together, and she had to distort the image in order to make it fit. And you were supposed to find that in order to know that. And there is, and I will not say his name, there is an entire book that's been written on this very ladder that had assumed that it was equal, and everything that had been written in that book has to be wrong, because they didn't pick that up. That one little thing was not picked up. No, what for? So anyway, coming back to these 3 levels of consciousness, what I would like to do now is to look at each one of these levels geometrically. Bring out the geometrical lens or image that each one of these consciousness levels interprets the reality through, and first identify them. Get each one of them identified so we can look at them, and then we will talk about them a little bit deeper. In order to do that, I'm going to give them names, and the name will, and you'll understand why I'm giving them these names as it progresses. The first one, the green one, I'm going to give it an 8 by 10, meaning that the number of radii across the green square is 8, and the number of radii across the circle that forms the phi ratio is 10. So I'm going to call that an 8 by 10. Does everybody get that? Anybody not get it? Okay. The next one will be a 10 by 12, because there's 10 radii across the square and 12 radii across the circle that sort of forms the phi ratio. The blue one is 14 by 18, which is Christ consciousness. Now, the first one, the 8 by 10, there's different ways that you can construct this to get a perfect 8 by 10. And I started to, I was just beginning to conceive of a way to do it when Thoth just said, look, let me just tell you a way. He says, it took us a long time to figure this one out. And he showed me this. This is not mine, but it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. You take an X down a circle, and you run Vesica Pisces down this circle in this particular pattern. It makes an 8 by 10 perfectly, and you can measure it without it. All you do is where the Vesica Pisces, you run lines down the center where the Vesica Pisces is, and where they touch, which will make parallel lines. And then you make parallel lines running this way, like this, running down. When you do, you come up with this. It will be, you can see the grid behind it, and it'll be exactly an 8 by 10. Each one of these things comes down and forms exactly 8 across here, but you know that it's a 10 because you see this Vesica Pisces that extends out here? Half of it is in here and forms one of the squares, and the other half comes out and tells you where the circle is. So you know you've got a perfect 8 by 10, okay, without any measuring sticks or anything. And then you look inside of here. Remember, though I did not get into this in great detail, and there is a book called Sacred Geometry by Robert Lawler, which is a really good book in sacred geometry, and I've got the thing and where you can get this from. And in there he will talk about it, though there are a lot of other sources that will talk about it, that the philosophy of Egypt was reduced to the square root of 2, square root of 3, square root of 5, and the 3, 4, 5 triangle. And all of those sacred angles and the 3, 4, 5 triangle are here at one moment, which anytime you see all that stuff appear at one time, you know you've got something real powerful going on. For example, the diagonal that runs across here is the square root of 2. And what I mean by the square root of 2 is just this. Just so you understand real quickly. If you count this as 1, and count this as a, just say that's a, then we know that a squared equals 1 squared plus 1 squared, right? Or a squared that should be an equals 1 plus 1, which equals 2, or a equals the square root of 2. So this is a square root of 2, diagonal. And the square root of 5 is simply this shape. 2 squares together, which is the Fibonacci one, or the shape of the king's chamber. If this is 1 and this is 1 and this is 1, and you're looking for that diagonal, then this is a, then a equals 1, and this equals 2. 1 plus. So a squared equals, 1 squared is 1, and 2 squared is 4, which equals 5. So a equals the square root of 5. That's the other sacred angle. The square root of 2, the square root of 5. And the square root of 3 is the golden mean across that one. A little more complex. So they're all here at once. Here's the line coming down there, which is the square root of 2. If you come from this point to this point, if you count 4 of these squares as 1, then there's your 1, and you got 8 going this way, so that's 1 and that's 2, so that's the square root of 5. And then in the middle, around one of the Vesica Pisces, you have a rectangle, which produces a square root of 3. It's a little bit more hard to explain. And then you have a 3, 4, 5 triangle inscribed in here. If you count 2 of these squares as your measuring stick of 1, then this will be 1, 2. See this triangle that's inscribed perfectly in here? Well, this edge will be 1, 2, 3, and this edge will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, and by Pythagorean rule, that has to be 5. So you have a 3, 4, 5 triangle inscribed perfectly. All the sacred things are here at one place at one time. And all these kinds of synchronicities, if you notice, the circle will precisely hit these precise edges. All this perfect moving lines that go in there. And one more thing, which is kind of funny here. You see this circle and this eye in here. You see it's the CBS eye. Actually, when we go to the next one, you'll see it even clearer over here. This is the same one again. There's the symbol for CBS, which whoever did that had something going for them when they understood that. And that literally is an eye. It's a lens. It's a lens that the Aboriginal interprets the reality through. And so here you start seeing all the synchronicities you just saw, and you see how the white light spiral reflects inside of there. The black light spiral reflects perfectly, which we saw later. It'll just precisely tip the edge over there and all these kinds of things. These amazing motions of lines that happen from this first level of consciousness. Okay, now we got that one. That one of 64 squares, first level has 64 squares in it, is related to another one that we saw earlier of 64 squares. And is related to another drawing we saw of Leonardo's, which is where that other one came from. And so at this point, you can superimpose. So this page was not flat when the copier came on, so you can start superimposing all kinds of patterns over Leonardo's drawing all at one time. You've got you've got a lot of stuff going on here now, but all those 64 squares and the first level of consciousness and all these other things are all on there. Notice also that here is the 8-cell division. And you can clearly see now how the proportions of the adult human being are contained in the original 8 cells before it ever even got to the adult. That it's all in there. And you start seeing the black and white spiral motions and a lot of other things. And you could superimpose so many things over there that you can't even begin to see it after a while. And it's all there. These are all just some of the energy fields around the body. And they're so complex, there's so many of them, it just becomes like a light coming off of us after a while. But what this means is that we've always thought that this drawing of Leonardo's is us, right? It's not us. It's the first level. It's where we came from. It's our past. It's our past. It's not the first level. It's not the second level that we're on now. When I saw this and realized this here, my first inclination was, well, did Leonardo understand what I'm being taught through Thoth? Was he was a Mason and all this stuff. I mean, did he? Is that how he got this? These were the thoughts that were going through my mind, and so I started looking through all of Leonardo's works. I went very deeply through everything that I could find on Leonardo, and to looking for another. See, if this was an 8 by 10, what I was looking for was a 10 by 12 or a 14 by 18 to see if Leonardo had another one of the pieces, because this could just be a coincidence. This could be just a coincidence. But if I did find a 10 by 12 or a 14 by 18, then that would be kind of start going outside of the coincidence, because you can make any kind of grid in there to make a human canon in all kinds of ratios. And so I looked and looked and looked, and I never could find it. And then one day, it struck me Well, this wasn't Leonardo's drawing in the first place. It came from his teacher, Vitruvius. And then I thought, well, once I realized that Vitruvius was his teacher, but his teacher lived 200 years earlier. His teacher was dead. And so I then went back and started studying Vitruvius's work. Vitruvius was his primary instructor on this kind of work. In fact, this drawing, right in the books, it says right down here that these are the human proportions after Vitruvius. And so I studied all Vitruvius's stuff to see what was going on there, and I started going through all of his stuff, and bingo, here's this drawing. At first, I didn't see it. It was a human cannon, and then second, and I'll show it to you, and then all of a sudden it popped out, and I saw it. Here's the 10 by 12. 2 of the 3 pieces were found, and I'll show it to you in a moment. And I was then I highly suspected that the same kind of information was not just something that Thoth was new, but this was something that was a body of information that had been kept on the earth for a long time. I'm going to slowly bring you to that level right now in just a moment. This is another way to lay the Vesica Pisces down an axis, a different way, which will produce the second level of consciousness. Again, you do the same thing, drawing your lines along the Vesica Pisces, using your Vesica Pisces as the underlying grid, and it comes up with this one. And again, you can see, only now, here's your Vesica Pisces overextends, and you can see that half of it's on one side, half of it's on the other, and you can count it. There'll be 10 this way, and 12 running across this way. So it's a 10 by 12, 100 squares. Could be why there's 100 squares in this thing, and the king's chamber, as we're going to see, this just struck me right now. I never realized this until this minute. The king's chamber is one of these guys, and it is made for our level of consciousness. It sits on the floor level. You'll see in a moment that there's another, the very level of stones that it sits in there is another proof, which I'll have to come up with in a minute, that they were referring to our level of consciousness. But the number of stones that the king's chamber is made out of is exactly 100 stones. I never realized that until now, that it corresponded with this. I'll have to record that in there. I guess I just did. I'm not going to tell you what all this other stuff is, except for one thing. I will tell you in a moment. The 4 squares that are around the body, the center of the body, that are a reflection of the original 8 cells, when I tried to put in these, I took the original 4 squares out of here, and I started putting the spirals in there, and it just kind of goes all over. It doesn't work. And Thoth watched me for a while, And he's sitting there with a grin on his face. And I says, what are you grinning for? And he says, well, you're probably not going to get that this afternoon. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, it took us about 10,000 years to figure it out. And I think I'll just tell you, okay? And I would have probably not figured it out. The ratios change. The original 4 squares around the first level of consciousness, if I was assuming that this was 1, but it's not 1, it's 1 squared. Of course, 1 squared equals 1, so how in the heck do you know the difference? There's no way to visually tell the difference. And so when you come to the next one, in order to make the energies work, you have to take, you don't go to 2, but you go to 2 squared, which is 4. And you must take 4 squares as your base. So that the diagonal of 4 squares, which is across 2 of them rather than 1, becomes your key. And so I did that, and then, so it goes 1, 1, 2, which exactly hits the apex of this point up here, and leaves. And everything, all the synchronicity hits again. And we'll explain what all this is in just a moment. I'll come back to this as well. But anyway, this is the eyeball that we use as a lens to interpret our reality with. And it is the second level, but I'll come back to that in just a moment. And this is Vitruvius's, that's kind of fun to say, Vitruvius's canon of the human body. And at first, it does not look like a 10 by 12. because it's got a whole lot of squares in there. But if you notice, he put these heavy dots on certain ones, and which makes a larger square grid hidden underneath there. And so if you count them, you'll see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. A 100 grid is hidden underneath there. And there's this, looks kind of like a vesica Pisces, but if you actually create it, it is not. The centers won't meet with each other. It's a constructed pattern that is a key that if you then put a compass from the center place to that place and spin it around, it will form a circle that will precisely hit the longest finger and forms a 10 by 12 pattern around there. So he had it hidden secretly behind there. And there are a lot of real interesting things about this. He has this diamond pattern here, around there like that. The diamond pattern is also the key. Remember the second level? The way that remember you had the 3 squares, and this middle square, which is where we are, to get to the Christ consciousness, you rotate it to a diamond. And so the first one goes like this, the second one goes like that, and the next one goes like this. It's like, and I heard one whale back there. You'll see some more things here. First level consciousness goes like this. Second one goes like that. And the third one goes like this. And it's like the faces of the cube equilibrium that he felt was so important. And so they even have that hidden behind there, even though it doesn't really correspond with a whole lot in there. And the next thing I want you to just notice is that each one of these squares that contains, that is in there, contains 9 squares. Okay? So just remember that thing about the 9 squares and the diamond, because we're going to come back to both of those details a little later. When I was working, I got 2 of the pieces from 2 consecutive, from Vitruvius and Leonardo, a student and disciple in the same school. And Vitruvius, by the way, was the master mason in Europe. He was the one that made many of these incredible cathedrals in Europe. He was a super person in olden days. And but I never had any absolute, definite, tied down, perfect proof that this was true, that these guys really understood what Thoth was trying to teach me. Until about a year and a half ago or something, I gave a workshop in Long Island, and I gave 2 back-to-back, which I don't do anymore. One weekend and one the next one. It totally wipes me out. It's not fair to the people, because by the time I get down with these things, I'm pretty tired. And but anyway, I did that, and I was sitting there. I had some time in between, and so I was hanging out in this house that had a big library. And in the library, here's this big old book that I'd never seen before, and it was called The Unpublished Works of Leonardo da Vinci. Stuff that nobody thought was important, because it was just sketches and stuff like this, and stuff that was never made it to anything like that. And so I go, wow, something I've never seen. I'm going through this book, and go to this one chapter, and I just couldn't believe it, what was in this chapter. And the people who wrote the book had no idea what it was about. Nothing at all. They didn't know. This is Leonardo's drawing of the flower of life, extended out. And he wrote extensively about the flower of life, not just a little bit. He had all kinds of drawings showing this sacred pattern in here, and how all the different patterns that were hidden inside of there, the relationships of triangles inside of there, all this various stuff, the seed of life, everything else. These were all the things that you'd find in the walls at Abydos on this temple over there. It almost looks like the same kind of stuff that they were doing on those walls over there. And if that isn't enough, he had pages of showing all of the angles and possibilities that were contained in there and the rotational patterns that were contained in the flower of life. You can see the spinning rotations and patterns that were down here and over here. And he had pages of this stuff going on and on and on. And it was the book's belief that all the inventions that Leonardo had come up with all the gear ratios and all the things, because he was the first one to invent all this stuff, that it was through, though they didn't understand it, they believed that it was through these drawings somehow that he had come up with these ratios and everything. Well, if he understood the flower of life, and you want to apply it to mechanics or anything else, it makes everything easy. No wonder he was considered a genius, because he understood the underlying patterns of the reality itself. It turns anybody into that. I mean, it's so. After I saw that, I mean, I don't know what you guys think, but there's no doubt in my mind, he was heading down the exact same pathway that we are in this room right now.
Maybe he had a teacher like you.
Huh?
Maybe he had a teacher like you.
Well, he had Vitruvius. He had all of Vitruvius's works and everything, and that's what he was studying. Plus, he was a Mason, which it was through the Masons that he got that, and he had all that information there. But I just didn't realize that the Masons had this. But yet, when I talked to that guy, just want to say that, when I talked to the guy that came into my room that was a Mason, I was asking him all kinds of questions, and he just kept saying, "I don't know, I don't know." I think that we have lost a whole lot in present day time. I don't think the Masons know a lot of this anymore, though maybe they do. I don't want to discredit them, but I just have a feeling that a lot of this has been lost. I have been searching for the canon of Christ consciousness, which they must have. But as I was searching for it, I suddenly started getting discouraged, because I realized that if they did have a canon, these guys built these massive churches to Christ. This was the most holy sacred work of their life. And if they did have the sacred geometry of Christ consciousness, they're not going to have it laying around somewhere. It's going to be locked up in gold boxes and buried 80 feet into the ground or somewhere, and I'm probably not going to find it very easily. And I've never been able, and I've looked through everything I can, and I've never been able to find it. But this is it, right here. But
I read that somewhere that the rest of his work is in the Vatican locked up.
of whose work? She said she read that the rest of the work of Leonardo da Vinci was locked up in the Vatican. That would make sense. Yes.
As I understand it from studying the Masons, I'm not one, you don't get the knowledge till your 33rd degree. Did the guy who walked in your room, was he a 33rd degree?
Well, I don't know. This is true, but I have talked to people that are 33 degree who have seen this and said this was, they had never received anything on this level.
Because I know Walt Disney was one. I mean, there are people
That would make sense, too. He actually did a sacred geometry Donald Duck move.
Yeah.
This is a cube. Quack, quack. There's more than one Donald Duck? She asked which Donald Duck was.
No, which Donald Duck?
Oh, I don't know.
Donald Duck in Mathemagic Land.
Donald Duck in Mathemagical Land?
Mathemagic Land.
Mathemagic Land. Okay. Well, anyway, this is it. And you can go straight to it because you can just, you've got all nine concentric circles, and it automatically makes the grids. You don't have to go through that complex before. And the interesting thing is that the one that forms this one that makes the grid around the body is not 1 squared but 2 squared, but 3 squared, which is 9 squares. And remember on Vitruvius' thing, every one of the squares had 9 squares in there. Again, one of the keys showing how It was the key that linked up to the next one. And so 9 squares is the key to that one. And then so you have to go across 3 squares to get your yardstick of 1 to make everything work. And again, 3, 3, perfectly touching the apex of there and leaving. And this is Christ consciousness here. It's the lens that the next 3rd level interprets the reality through. Now, this next drawing is not completely mine, and I really don't know. I want to give credit for who did this, though I don't know who did it, because so many people have tried to take credit for this. Elizabeth Clare Prophet said it was hers, but it couldn't have been hers because James Blair had done it 10 years earlier, and he doesn't claim that it is his. And he says that he got it from a much earlier source. So I don't know where the source came from. I don't know if it goes back to Egypt or somewhere like that. But what you're about to see, if you've never seen this before, most of you have seen this on a video, but if you've never seen this before, this is a rather remarkable piece of work. We're going to take these 3 pieces and that you just saw and superimpose them over this drawing that you're about to see, this new one. But if you would carefully, and I want to make a thing about this, I have not drawn this to in this drawing, I did not draw it to precise proportions, though I know what the precise proportions are, and I have drawn the drawing, and I think I've got them back here. I just thought I put them in there. We'll see if I did in a moment. But if not, the proportions are ever so slightly different. And what I would like you to do is to just strictly follow where I'm showing you on the screen so that we can make some sense out of this. And that is, first of all, you see the red grid of the 8-cell division. This guy, right? Everybody see that around here? There's the 8 cells. There's the square that fits around the 8 cells. The dotted line is the inner surface of the zona pellucida, and the solid line will be the outer surface of the zona pellucida, or the place that it goes into phi ratio. And now, of course, at the same time, though I don't have it drawn on here, you've got the human body in here, stretched across here like Leonardo. So you've got both the 8 cells division and the human body. Now, if you take a circle, this blue one that goes around here, it just fits in from the top of the head of the human body to the bottom of the feet of the human body, or around the square that will fit around the original 8 cells, either one. And then you make a circle that will fit perfectly at the phi ratio point up here, this one up here, that will just touch this circle and be originated from that place, which happens to be the 13th chakra above your head. Then this circle here and this circle here are in the exact proportions to the planet that we sit on and the moon that rotates around us. Those are the exact sizes of the Earth and the moon. And they are contained in your proportions or in the original 8 cells. And I can prove it mathematically. I'll do that right now. Not only are they in proportion to each other, but they are in phi ratio to each other. Because the square and the circle that fits through them are in the phi ratio to each other. So I can prove that they are in proportion to each other if I use the actual mileage of the Earth and the Moon, and that they are in proportion to each other if I can calculate that the square, if you could figure out the miles around the square that would fit around the Earth itself, relative to a circle, if you put the moon right on the surface of the Earth, and you could calculate how many miles would go around this circle here, if those two were the same, that would simultaneously prove that they're in the phi ratio, and also that that these proportions are what I say they are. And so it's real easy to figure out the square around the Earth, because all you have to do is know how many miles there are in the diameter of the Earth. Though the Earth is not a perfectly round ball, there's a slight variation. You can take an average, and that average is this. The average is that there are 7,920 miles through the diameter of the Earth. And if you multiply that times 4 to figure out what the square would be, there are 31,680 miles. 31,680 miles in this imaginary square that would fit around the Earth, or a cube, however you want to look at it. And if you wanted to know if the circle that would fit through the moon, if it was on the surface, if the circumference of this is the same, that's what you're looking for, then all you have to do is take the diameter of the Earth plus the radius of the moon plus the radius of the moon, which, and the two radii equal the diameter. So you just take the diameter of the moon, the diameter of the Earth, you add them together, and you multiply times pi. And that will give you how many miles would fit around here. And if it happens to be the same, or even close, you've got a phi ratio thing, which would prove everything I just said. And the diameter of the Earth is 7,920 miles, and the diameter of the moon is 2,160 miles. You can read this in any book. You add them together, and you get 10,080. If you want to take 22/7, which happens to be a real close approximation to pi, it comes up with exactly 31,680 miles. If you take pi, it's off a couple miles. But the fact that it can do that, the fact that the size of the Earth and the size of the moon are contained in the original 8 cells of life, or contained inside the human body, the very planet we live on. I mean, you might let that sink in for a moment. It's pretty amazing that would be there. It's just like, I mean, how can that be? Well, he said as above, so below, but I mean, it still boggles my mind. I still don't quite understand that. That says, are there only certain sizes of planets that are possible? Are there only certain ratios? Kepler felt that there were only certain places that planets could rotate around suns. Are there also only certain sizes of planets that can even be? We know that there are only certain places that electrons can be. I mean, this says some really, really, really deep things. On top of that, if you were to take the diameter of the Earth and bring it up to the center of the moon and back down, and a line from the center of the moon to the center of the Earth, this view, which is the view of a pyramid from that angle, only this, but not this one. It happens to be 51 degrees, 51 minutes, and approximately 24 seconds. It's the Great Pyramid. It is an exact view or proportion of the Great Pyramid itself. And in the Emerald Tablets, Thoth says that he made the Great Pyramid, and that he made it from the proportions of the Earth. And there's proof that the proportions of the Great Pyramid are located in the Earth. Oh, well, yeah, you are coming up with it. This does come back up with that image that the Masons drew in that first one. And it also began to tell me what these places are that they drew to. And what I now know is that in the human body, it's the navel. That's what that spot is right there that this comes up to. It's exactly to where the belly button is. But what all these things are in here is it has to do, and we'll talk about these later. There's a sphere that will move through here and touch all 4 spheres. It's real, real, real important. There's another one inside, if you could get it in there, that would touch all 8 of these. the relationship of those two spheres, if you put a square around the little one and if you drew these to the proper proportion, if you put a square around the one that fits through there, relative to the one that sits inside, makes a holographic image of the whole one, and it forms a phi ratio again. And it's another key to all of this. And that, according to Thoth, was why the Lucifer rebellion happened. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So the inner aspect of the whole thing has an outer image of what's on the outer aspect of the whole thing. But there is there's a great cosmic controversy over all this, which I'll bring up later. It's the reason why that Lucifer did what he did, but I have to wait till I get there to explain it. Here I was just going to show you the next thing I was going to come up and show you is the pyramid, and then show you the actual pyramid. This is the angle that they're referring to over here. Now these are the drawings that these next two drawings are of incredible importance for some people. Not for most of you guys. But the inner circle that passes through the middle determines if it's set up here. See the circle here? If you set it up here, it will determine the inner thickness of the zona pellucida. The inner circle that will fit inside the middle, if you run them over, they will exactly make, if this is a 64 grid, it will exactly form the original 4 squares in the middle. And if you run it over, it will tell you where the outer thickness of the zonas of pellucida is. And again, those two circles become very, very important. And this is the one where you got these are the precise proportions now. If you ran a square around that one, it would form a phi ratio like the bigger one. And there is another geometrical problem that one would have to solve if you wanted to know everything about the subject. And that is that taking this structure over here, you can see this Star of David pattern around here, which forms a cube, which is sitting at an angle, right? And we know that is, or at least, I guess I'm just basically telling you, that is the way that the energy field sits around the body. But remember, we also had a square going this way, right? So we have a square going this way and a square going tilted. And there has to be a mathematical relationship between those or everything was wrong. Took a long time to figure it out. This is it right here. That white tetrahedron is like this green one right here. And the black one, I think it is, comes down like this here, forming this pattern like that. And this is the square that we see going around the body. And these happen to be where the lines are that were drawn on Leonardo's drawing. He divided the whole thing into 1, 2, 3, 4 parts. The piece that comes over the top and the bottom is the length of your hand and all that other stuff. So you can actually see the tilted square or the star tetrahedral field in relationship to the square at this time. And you can mathematically see how the two link together. It was real important for me to see that because once I saw that there was this square this way and also this way, I had to find the link or my mind would never stop. It would just keep going. Because then I would have this little doubt in my head and there going, about all of this. But once I found all of this, it solved the problems for me. Another proof that the Egyptians well understood what we're saying right here, right now. Well, if you were to cut off the pyramid right on the floor of the king's chamber, like this, where you cut it off right there, and then take an aerial view of it, and they have done this, and they've calculated this carefully with computers, the area of that piece that's cut off, this would be the floor of the chamber, is exactly 1/2 the area of the base. 1/2 the area of the base is this image. In other words, if they were to rotate that around like that, it would exactly hit the image. And you can see what 1/2 is like this. So you can tell without even measuring. You know it's 1/2. That a diamond in a square is always 1/2 because you know that these are all equal, and this is a diagonal down there. So this part is equal to this part, right? So this is equal to this. This is equal to this. This is equal to this, and this is equal to this. It's 1/2. It's 1/2 the. This is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them, and this is 4 of them, and so it's 1/2 of the area. That's without going through any kind of mathematical way of doing it. And so the very placement of where the floor of the king's chamber was another hidden thing, showing that that it was made for the second level of consciousness, which he also did the same thing in here on the second level of consciousness. And this is that relationship with the square. This is the proportion here. I could really go off on this drawing right here, right now. I don't know if I will. You got all your square root of 3, square root of 2, square root of 5 lines just by connecting them together and all these patterns. This one coming down to here is 1 square of a 64 square grid pattern. This one you can really extract all kinds of information from it, but I'll just let you guys do that. It's really fun what can be done from that drawing and what's possible if you ever wanted to study this someday. We got 4 minutes for questions.
One thing I wanted to ask you, when we were speaking about the sacred geometry and shapes, and I forget where it was. I had the question. I had it written down here, but my question was.
I'm kind of sorry. I want to apologize in a way that you guys can't hit your questions right when they're saying them, right when I'm doing them. But
it's
got to do it
to deal with the architecture. And what came to me, my question was, when we're dealing with the sacred geometry and we're building things in the third dimension based on sacred geometry, that they're forming these shapes of beauty. Do they only resonate on the third dimension, or do these shapes actually, because of their proportions, do they exist on other levels also?
Yeah, they do.
They extend out in this octave?
And from another point of view, anything that, we'll talk about this later, anything that exists in third dimension first existed in fourth and higher. But it had to first come through fourth before it got to third.
Even if it's not within ratio of using phi and things of that nature to
even if it's not, no matter what it is. Everything that was created synthetically, say you made this thing, was first created out of your imagination and brought down through the causal planes and slowly brought down through the various levels until you manifested it. And it had to pass through the fourth dimensional level of existence before, which would not look like this. Because it would look
so
like
then my question is, if it is within sacred geometry and is within proportion, does it stay the same, or does it also still continue to shift on each dimension, or does it stay the same shape?
No, shape from one place to the next is utterly, completely, totally, utterly different. Though there is a mathematical relationship to it, it is not the same. Experientially, if you were to look at a cube here and to see a cube in the fourth dimension, you wouldn't recognize the two.
Okay, so the sequences and things of that nature shift also as we move into another dimension.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so all that you've been teaching us is the mathematical proportions that exist on the third dimension.
Yes, but it all applies on all levels.
Right.
Everything keeps.
Fibonacci and things, those apply.
Everything
on
apply.
They don't shift.
It just things will change. But if there's a change, there'll be a mathematical reason why they changed. There's a logicalness to everything, all the way through. There's no just something that just happens. It all comes out of a sphere. Once you know the sphere, everything else will be generated and come back to it in one way or another. There's no surprises on those kind of levels at all. Eventually the mind, you got to get bigger and bigger heads and skulls and to comprehend all this stuff. But there's no changes. And this thing of objects having to first come into fourth dimension first and then third is real important, because when we start looking about the ancient civilizations and what goes on with the grid patterns that create these civilizations, and what happens when these grid patterns are I'll just say it right now. If you have a third dimensional object, even though it was created by maybe one person or a group of people, it is not, it's really just light. It's just a thought pattern. It's a standing waveform. And but it is maintained in the reality not by the person who created it, but by the grid that we all have in common. If the grid is broken down, all the thought patterns go back into energy. All synthetic objects dissolve away. And they return back into elements. And they don't hold their shape or their pattern. And so when a consciousness leaves and it dissolves its grid, and I'm talking about the grid that extends around the entire planet, like 50, 60 miles up around the planet, then all synthetic stuff goes with it. It's for this reason that a very intelligent race, if they want to leave something on the planet that is going to last for a long time, that's going to go through these dimensional shifts that we go through, and it's going to stay there, then the only way that they can do it, well, it's not the only way, there is other ways, but it requires concentration and a lot of energy. The only way they can do it easily is to take matter that is of the planet, which will naturally move through the dimensional levels. So, which is not based upon a grid. It's based upon the energies of the planet itself. So if you wanted to build the Great Pyramid, you don't make it out of ABS plastic or stainless steel, because when we went through the first shift, it's gone. So you use very hard materials that are out of the earth itself. It isn't that they're primitive in doing that, they're just smart, that's all. They just know that if you want something to stay with that planet for a long time, you make it out of the natural materials of that planet. You could make it out of synthetic materials, but they would have to set up Merkaba fields or something around them, and then they would have to maintain them and in various ways, which is difficult to do. And so it's easier to just use something natural. No, everything is not natural. Yeah, but we made it. We changed the molecules around. We used thought to do it with. We used thought to... some things you can make like clay. Now this whole thing of synthetic materials, there is a spectrum of stability. I'll put it that way. Like glass, for example, is just melted sand, you might say, a silicon. Glass, but it's still created by thought. It won't happen in the shape of a window naturally without human beings being around. Lightning might come into the sand and melt it and turn it into glass. You might get tektites. There's all kinds of tektite materials that are around the world. But when you look back in archaeology, all you ever find is clay pots, wooden things, all the stuff. It looks like that's all they used. You can't ever find any of these things, though they have found objects that defy all this. Occasionally, there have been a few things found that are ancient, that are made out of older materials. For example, Noah's Ark has high-level, sophisticated metals in it. They don't know how they possibly did it because the thing's 13,000 years old, and these they've got none of this. Long before there was even the different various metal ages and things, Noah's Ark's got metal. There it is, fact. Real good stuff in it. Yeah.
One comment, weren't the early Masons basically the stone cutters? And they were simply interested in how to put a building up that wasn't going to fall over. And then as the hierarchical structures came into it, and they got off on other technologies and other.
I guess, but this goes all the way back into Egypt, so I don't know. One little detail that we've discovered about the Mason stonecutters, which is a real interesting thing, which was another person who was going to teach this class at one point, but ended up not doing it. But he discovered that, have you ever looked at the Mason signatures that are in the cornerstone? There'll be this thing on the back, and it'll have these little signatures, which are all the people who were the stonecutters and people who built the whole thing. Have you ever looked at those signatures? Has anybody seen those? They look at like this. They look like this. They are maybe things like this, or things like this. And we got about 30 or 40 of these things and found out that every single one of them can be mapped over the flower of life. They're like keys. They're signatures that are just simply lines that are on the flower of life. That, they might be a complete circle. They might come like this, a complete circle, and come down with in another line like that or something. But they're all right off, every one of them, right off the flower of life. Another proof that they understood that. Yeah. Okay. Well, you got kind of more than one question there, but the grids are every life form, every species, even if there's only 2 on the Earth, can't exist without the grid being there first. The grid has to happen first, and then the species is there. And so you've got, like I said, you've got grids that stretch around the entire planet from an average of 60 feet in the Earth to about 60 miles above it. And they're all superimposed. So much, there's as many grids as there are species of things, which is a lot. And so it looks like it's just like a blue glow, like a whitish blue glow coming off the Earth, because they are electromagnetic. And as a species becomes extinct, that grid goes away. It leaves, which is what's happening. We're getting how many species? 30 million, and we're down to how many? 115 million? 150? Half of them are gone. They're leaving. But where they're going, they're not real. There's no such thing as extinction. The form is just transmuting up to the next level. We all have certain animal natures within us. Some of us have certain animal natures stronger than other ones. And though we don't think of ourselves that way, but the native peoples of the world are more in tune with this, and I've had a lot of experience in this way myself. Not to the point of becoming or turning from a light body into another animal, but the animals have, a lot of the work that has happened here has come from the animals, and mostly for me it's been with birds like this. The life forms are leaving, they're going. It's like 30 an hour or something. I don't know what it is. Life is leaving here fast, and like you said, 30 million. So we're down to 15 million, and half the life of the planet is left now. That's a lot, and but they're not dying. That's the thing you must know, at least in your heart. That, they're not dying. They're just transmuting to another. They're reforming the grids at another dimensional level. So but what they do is they reform those grids up to first. The grids have to be. The grids come from 4th to 3rd, and then they move back to the one in the 4th, and then dissolve the one in the 3rd. Well, it isn't really leaving the Earth. It's just on a different wavelength of the Earth. They're just in a different. They're still on the Earth. And in this other wavelength, they're very healthy and probably real happy because it feels they're in tune with that place a lot more and feels a lot better. And we're about to do that same thing. It's okay. This is a natural. This part of the whole thing is a natural process. It's not. I mean, it looks real bad, I know, I understand it, but that part's okay. The part that's unnatural is the speed at which we were doing this at. This is what's so extraordinary. Okay, now we're going to look at these internal structure rooms inside of the Great Pyramid. The reason we're going to do that is because when Akhenaten gave the Egyptian mystery school of Akhenaten the Law of One, he in those last 5.5 years, the way that he trained the people to go in to become to go into the immortal state, or the state of awareness of this, had to do with these 3 chambers in the Great Pyramid. This is the king's chamber up here, the queen's chamber, and what's sometimes called as the well. And those 3 places were the primary places that were used, though there may have been other places in there also. They're still discovering more places in there all the time. They've discovered 3 more rooms in the Great Pyramid just in the last year. Or maybe, no, more than that, 2 or 3 years or so. And John Anthony West just discovered another big one underneath the Sphinx. The Japanese discovered another one on the Sphinx. They discovered the tunnel that is talked about in so many of the ancient books that goes from the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid. In fact, all 3 of the pyramids. That tunnel was just discovered by the Japanese. A lot of new stuff that are becoming aware of. Very little of this has been published at all. The 3 rooms that they found were off the Queen's Chamber. They found 3 rooms off 3 walls. And one of the walls they found was absolutely empty. One of the walls was filled from floor to ceiling with radioactive sand. And the other one had a solid gold life-size statue of somebody in it. And the Japanese stole it. And it caused a huge... the Egyptian Antiquities Minister was fired, and there was a worldwide FBI type thing trying to find it right now. But I mean, it was priceless. It was solid gold. But it's gone now. It's probably sitting in some rich guy's house somewhere. Anyway, I want to describe these 3 rooms and what they are. This is called the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber. It has nothing to do with kings and queens. This is called the king. It was the Arabs who called this the King's and Queen Chamber. The Arabs bury their men in flat roofs, and they bury their women in pitched roofs, and so that's why it was called the King and Queen's Chamber. If these had been reversed around, they would reverse the names around. And this was never a burial chamber for a person. That was not its purpose, ever. You'll read about that many, many times, but there is one very definite proof of that, which is kind of undeniable, though they try to deny it. And because they say that it was designed originally for Cheops. But in every single case in Egyptian history, without exception, that I know of, when they buried someone of importance, and it's not just king and queens, but it was like the doctors and a lot of other people that were important in there, when they were all buried, they took their organs out and they put them into these four clay jars, and then mummified them, put the body into a sarcophagus, sealed the lid up, and then they carried the sarcophagus and the jars to the place where the person was to be buried. And but that would have been impossible here because the sarcophagus still sits in the king's chamber. It's sitting right in there, you can see it. And so if you went in there and first of all, you'd say, well, that's where they buried it and somebody stole the body or something. But the sarcophagus, and this is the important part, is bigger than the doorway that leads into it. You can't get it in or that's why it's still there. You can't get it in or out. It's impossible. The lid could be turned and taken out, so somebody stole the lid. sarcophagus is still there. And so they obviously didn't ever mean for someone to be buried there. They would have carried it in. So whoever built this thing put the sarcophagus in the room before they finished it. And there's another area of this place up here called the King's Chamber that I want to talk about. Okay, that's the side view of the King's Chamber, which looks like this. And again, the King's Chamber is 2 squares, and the diagonal of that ceiling height is exactly 1/2 the diagonal, which means that if you're in that room, by measuring the diagonal half, it folds down and marks a very specific spot in the precise center of the room. There are 2 places of initiation in this room. One of them is right about here. You come in over here, which is where the sarcophagus sits, and the other one is in the precise center of the room. They're different. Just to go through the initiation spots, you begin down here at the end of this tunnel, which we haven't talked about yet. You then go to the King's Chamber. You first go into that tunnel, you wait a few years. You then go into the King's Chamber, and you immediately go to the Queen's Chamber, which is where you get stabilized. You wait a few years, and then you come back and you finish, and sometimes hundreds of years. And then you come back and complete it in the center here. It's the final one. This is where they tell you, yes, you really did do it. And so over the top of here, there are these 5 little chambers over the top of the King's Chamber. Now what present-day Egyptian archaeologists say is that those chambers are there to relieve the weight load or the pressure off of that flat roof so that it won't collapse. That's the official purpose of those chambers. But you could say, well, why don't they have any chambers over this one? Because it's a lot further down and a lot more weight. And they could say, well, it's got a pitched roof on it, and they don't need it as much. Then you could say, well, what about this one way down here? It's got a flat roof on it, and there's no chambers on it. And it's got zillions and billions and trillions of more tons of weight on it. And they'll just go, well, I don't know. You know, there is a very specific reason for these chambers up here, and I'm going to try to explain it. But you can get a real good idea when you look at how they're constructed. There are 9 super heavy stones, 1-piece stones in the ceiling. And again, like I said, there's 100 stones if you count every stone in the room. And those, over the top of those 9 stones, there is this series of stones that look kind of like this, where the bottom of these series of stones is polished like glass, and the top of the stones is bumpy and uneven. And then there is an air space with another series of stones that comes sort of like this. Now, I'm going to put all of these in here first. And then I'll talk about it. How many stones what? Oh, that was 6. Yeah. Okay. Each one of these things is polished like glass with air underneath it, and then on top of it is a totally irregular, bumpy surface covered with about 1/4 inch of black foam. Looks like it was sprayed out of a spray can. If you just by looking at this, if you know anything about reflection and absorption, this is reflecting something this way and absorbing something that's coming from above. It's a separator, a divider of 2 different kinds of energies. Okay, now that you can see that, what we're going to do now is superimpose those 3 sets of, what Thoth says is if you take those 3 levels of consciousness, the diagrams, superimpose them over the diagram of the earth with the Great Pyramid on it, you can then begin to understand what all these rooms are and why they're placed in those particular positions and everything else of that nature. Now this one is the first level of consciousness. For those of you who know, the pyramid is based on thirds. That's the primary division factor that is in there. You'll see why they chose thirds right now. The pyramid is used for the second level of consciousness to go to the third level of consciousness. That's its whole soul, purpose, and function on consciousness level. There's a lot of other, lots and lots and lots of other reasons why it exists. Huh? It's for the initiation process that was designed in there, or tuned in there, was for us to go to Christ consciousness. It was not for the aberrational to come to us or up there for the first level. So from second level to go to third level. And if you drew the pyramid across the earth right here and up to the top, which I don't have on here, you would see that the steps between the base of the pyramid and the top of the pyramid would be into fifths. It'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's not divisible by 3. However, here's the pyramid now. And if you notice, this one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is divisible by 3. And the Christ consciousness one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, also divisible by 3, which is the reason why thirds were chosen. Now coming back to this one, look at the black and white spiraling energy that comes out of this area. That's why I chose this square up here before. You have a black light spiral coming like this, and you have a white light spiral that just happens to hit the absolute apex of the pyramid and leave. It comes up out there. And supposing you wanted to connect in with just the white light spiral. These are very powerful energy beams that are coming in out of this mass of energy. That's the reason why the mass is so great. That creates these fields. And you want to connect in just with a white light one, which comes out of there and spirals out and reaches deep, 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 deep into space. He says it goes all the way to the center of the galaxy. I don't know. I guess so. And but you got a certain electrical problem in that right above you, you have the black light spiral originating also. And so you say you want to separate those two things out. This was the king's chamber was put. Here's the center of the pyramid. It was put off center. Where they placed it was right here. They don't know why it was off center. It wasn't on center because they wanted to get in here. They can't come up here to get it. They can't come down here because they cross at this point. So they came to this place right here, but then they had this problem. And that was the reason for all those chambers going in there, was to separate the black from the white, get them to two places, so that when you were sitting in the sarcophagus, you could tune into only this one energy field. Otherwise, you'd have both of them originating there. You would be almost impossible to distinguish one from the other. And it was the male energy lines that they were concerned with, not the curving female one. The curving female one has no distinguishing mark on it. But the male one is countable. 1, 1, 2, 3, set at 90-degree turns. Now, one more thing to notice about this arrangement up here. If this was the pyramid, yes, the room is off-center. It sits like that, kind of. But the sarcophagus sits in a place like this, which is in the exact center of the pyramid. So when you are laying down in the sarcophagus with your head facing toward the center of the back wall, you have this, they tune to the, you have the white light one, the female one coming in too, but they tune to the black one, the male one rather, of the white. And it would come in like this, it would hit the very center and rise up, come right up from underneath, come right through where the head is, so that when you laid down, you could tune your head and get the pineal passing right through the center of your pineal gland. That was the whole purpose of what was going on. Your head is toward the door. Same wall as the door, which is toward the center of the, huh?
Is it north, south, east, west?
I believe that it is toward the north. It's coming up at a 45-degree angle, right through your pineal gland. And there is a little bit of proof in this that that's how they used it, because recently they have discovered that when a person goes into theta, that there is a chemical that is excreted from the pituitary gland right in here, which comes out as a sweat, and then it crystallizes into this white powder, crystalline white powder, if you stay in there for very long. And when they first opened the sarcophagus, they noticed all this white powder at one end, and they scooped it all up and it's put into a little glass vial, and it now sits in the British Museum. And it wasn't until just recently that they discovered that it was the same chemical that's excreted when someone is deeply into theta. And it was a lot of powder. It wasn't just one guy dying and having a good time dying in there. I mean, it was a lot of people over a long period of time. Unless he had a real sweaty gland, I guess. So, what they would do is, after going through 12 years of the left eye of Horus and 12 years of the right eye of Horus, and then you were all ready, they took you and they put you into the sarcophagus, they put the lid on, and they left you in there for approximately 3.5 days. And then you would tune to that field and you would follow the energy out. And returning, if it was a logarithmic spiral that they had taken off on, there's no beginning and no end. They would not know how to come back. But because it was Fibonacci and it has a starting point, they can count the turns. And they were trained to do this. They could count their turns right back and come back at 5, 3, 2, 1, 1, and back in their body. They could locate their body in the spiral. And that was all part of the training. This is according to Thoth. It's so outrageous that how could anybody everybody ever just figure it out? I don't know. But that is what they did. And then once they had that, they got out of there and they were like totally blown away from it all. They were then brought down into the Queen's chamber, from which in the Queen's chamber, it was some kind of stabilizing experience so that they wouldn't lose the experience. A lot of times you can have a very powerful experience in life, and then as you start going through life, it kind of fades away. It gets weaker. They did something to them in the Queen's chamber that would lock it in so they wouldn't lose the experience. And I'm not exactly sure what that was. But there was something that leads into the Queen's chamber, a very little known thing, which might bring us home a little bit. Do you remember the shroud of Turin of Jesus and the face that was on there? Recently, they have discovered, well, that shroud, they believe, they don't know how the image was created, but through intense analysis of it, it appears to be made by some intense blast of heat. That's all they can say, but they don't know exactly how it happened. And she has a picture of it here.
This is a positive.
This is a positive rather than a negative. Well, they have discovered, more or less recently, this same image leading into the Queen's chamber on the stone by a process totally unknown. It's only about this big and it's up high, and it's right as you go into it. And it appears to be the exact same image as a Shroud of Turin. And also, as they've analyzed that, it appears to be done by some kind of intense blast of heat. But they don't know what it was or how it was created. Which is hardly anyone knows about that whole thing. Yeah.
When I was in the King's Chamber a year ago, January, in a sarcophagus, there is no lid. There is no.
They took the lid away a long time ago.
How could that fit through the door?
The lid can be turned sideways and it can go through easily. It's only just about like an inch all the way around. The lid can be turned. That sarcophagus is that high.
Yes, when you climb into it.
You know, and the lid is about this wide. The lid could go out, and that's why it's no longer there. But the sarcophagus can't go out. This is the King's chamber. This is the Queen's chamber. And this is the well, and this is the pit. And this is the grand gallery. Now the other, that was the middle initiation. There's 3 initiations altogether. The first initiation begins down here. Now there's a room down here with a tunnel that just goes down and ends in nowhere. They don't have any idea why it's there. They don't know. They got a pretty good idea now because we told them. And they've sealed it off with big bars to make sure nobody gets in there anymore. But they did know that there was it was really strange because when we first got there, they had barred it off up at the top. They just barred the whole thing off and made it illegal to go in there. I mean, you went in there, right to jail. I mean, they even had a guy with a machine gun sitting there for a long time, make sure that no one messed around with it. And the reason was because so many people that have went down there have died. Lots of them. Or have been maimed, or have been poisoned, or have sent into hospitals. And by means that no one can understand. They have found poisonous snakes down in there that don't exist in Egypt, or poisonous spiders that don't exist in Egypt. Poisonous gases have just appeared out of nowhere. On and on and on, but stuff like this. And it's all documented, and the government will clearly admit to it, the whole thing. They just don't know what is going on down here, and so they just sealed the whole thing off and won't let you in there. We have clearly shown to them that that's not the problem. The problem is at the end of this tunnel. And so since then, they have opened the doors up, and you can now go down in here, but the tunnel is blocked off and sealed, so you can't get inside of it. It's big, heavy bars. Do you have a quick question?
Yeah. What is the pit?
Who knows? Nobody knows what the pit is. The pit is the mystery of the pyramid for me. The pit is a room. It's a big pit. But that's where they put the workers. No, but on the edge of this pit is what looks like a golden mean, big, huge block, polished, clean, smooth, of granite. I think it's granite. And it looks like it's ready. It looks like you can just push it over and it would fall. And I've sat and thought about this a long time, and I'm sure it's meant to fall at the right moment. It will, and probably will shake the whole earth somehow. I don't know what it's meant to do. But that block is ready to go, and it isn't going.
It looks like a room.
Well, that isn't the exact shape of it. I just, a womb? Don't let that lady see any ink blots, man. Okay. Anyway, I don't know what the pit is. I really don't know. I'm sorry, but I don't know what it is. But it is something very special. It's like when Al, what's his name, came in through here. I don't know his Muslim name is 300-400 years ago. There was a door right here, and the door was such that if you just touched it just right, it would open up. And there was all the stories. He had read all the stories about how they could do that and had gone in there. It would swing on a hinge like this. But he could never find it. I mean, because the seams are just sealed like you can't even get paper between them. And so they dug in here. They dug through here. They dug through a whole tunnel and everything else like that. And when they were getting down here, close to, over in this area over in there, they suddenly heard these huge sounds. These giant, massive blocks were sliding down a thing, sealing off the entryway into the king's up into the king's chamber. The pyramid knew they were coming in, but it was also the downfall of the pyramid because they heard the sound and they started digging toward the sound, and found this tunnel, and then found their way back out. If they hadn't heard the sound, they would have just kept going right into the middle of this pyramid and never probably would have found their way in. Did you have a quick question?
Where does that tunnel go, the one that they're having on the property?
Where does this tunnel go?
Yeah, what's it all about?
Well, okay, I'm going to tell a story about it. And it is a fourth dimensional tunnel. This is why all these things would appear in there. You go into the fourth dimension. The end of it extends into the fourth dimension. And when you go in there, whatever you think and whatever you feel literally happens. And so if you're uninitiated and you go in there and you have any fears, they become real. If you're afraid of something, then that thing becomes real and it'll kill you. If it's your fear, if your fear is of drowning, the whole place would fill up with water. You can't have any fears and go into the fourth dimension, or they will become real. And we're going to talk about that a lot too. Okay.
Did you just say this was the first level of initiation?
This is the first level of initiation.
Why did you have all your fears manifested before you
You have to work with those first. The first 12 years of training, which we're going to show you in a little bit, was the left eye of Horus. And that's where you dealt with all your fears. Once you got through all your fears, I mean, you got to be with a place where you could be so fearless that if they said anything, you'd be able to do it without even a heartbeat. And could not be afraid of dying at all, in any way, shape, or form, or any of the other fears that are associated with humankind. You could be fearless. It's the only way you can get through. And all the world's religions dealt with this. Like some of them were incredible, the things they would do to get you to get into a fearless state. And then the 12 years after that was the training on the mental planes and the stuff, like kind of things that we're going through to get the understanding. And then once you had the emotional and mental balance in all of this stuff, then they would have you begin in this little chamber down here. Let me show you why the wall, this tunnel, just goes out in the middle of nowhere. Look what happens with the black light spiral. It comes right down here. So what they did is, they had, the room was right here, and they dug the tunnel over to where the black light spiral arm was reached. And they did it down here and not up here because this goes through 0 point. And they didn't want to get it up in here because whoever got it up in here would have to go through the great void. And they wanted to catch it after it was outside of the great void, after they got outside of 0 point, and take it from there. And that one wraps around and goes and connects in with the center of the earth. And so it begins with the experience that takes you into the darkness rather than into the light, or the halls of Amente. That's what it's called. It's literally an infinite space. And so, same way, there's this long tunnel. There's this tunnel, and you've got this, I believe it actually comes from this direction now that I think about it. Like this. And the person would sit in, originally they would sit with their knees folded up like this, but the tunnel's only about that high. And we can't do that. So what I had to do was to lay down with my body like this, and then you line that beam up to your head, and you can feel it. It feels like somebody's got a. It's real strong. I mean, you can't miss it. There's no way you could possibly miss this one. And you've got 2.5 million blocks of mass forming this thing, and then we all had to lay down. There was 5 of us, like this. But the hieroglyphics, when you see the hieroglyphics around this, you'll see them like this, sitting like this. And this will be Osiris. And there'll be like 40 or 50 of these guys inside this tunnel, like 75 feet or 100 feet long. And so Osiris will be sitting here, facing that way, and then all these other people will be facing this way. And he's taking them into the halls of Amente. And but our bodies are too big now, and we can't fit in